Welcome back, everybody, for another edition of Ask the Rabbis. Here's our panel, our very happy panel here this morning. Once again, we have Rabbi Orlovsky from Yerushalayim. We have Rav Gav, who's joining us from the beach out in Costa Rica, no, from Jerusalem, Israel. That's how pretty it looks. And, of course, Rabbi Yitzchak Feldheim, who is traveling but managed to find a space, suitable for this Ask the Rabbi panel. I want to apologize ahead of time to our audience because here I am sitting. I know my camera flashing in some type of background here, but I am in bidud or quarantine for the next couple of days. So I'm not able to get to my office, where of course I had a very nice setup. But the Torah learning has got to go on. We're going to do it from these confines over here. Rabbi Orlovsky, Rav Gav, Rabbi Feldheim, pleasure to have you on once again. Rav Gav, you're on mute, so don't even bother answering until you take yourself off of mute. Yeah, okay. Today we're discussing Orthodox Jewry, conservative Jewry, Reform Jewry, all the different sects of Judaism. There's a feeling amongst Jews that are non-Orthodox that somehow Orthodox Jews or Orthodox Judaism is down upon them, doesn't consider them to be as Jewish as we are, we Orthodox Jews are, etc. And so we put out feelers. A bunch of people wrote back with questions that they have, and I tried to categorize them in a way that will give our viewers the most organized way of dealing with this. So I'm going to ask the questions. There's 3 questions here that I'm going to bunch together that are sort of on the same topic, and then just judging by the most charismatic and photogenic, I'm going to start with you, Rabbi Orlovsky, if you don't mind, so we can get things started.
It's only appropriate.
Absolutely. Here we go. Okay. Question is, the category of these questions is, I am just as Jewish as you are. Comes up a lot. So the first question is, why do the Orthodox Jews think non-Orthodox Jews are not Jewish or lesser Jews, and that their movements that they're part of in their synagogues, etc., are not legitimate? Okay. Question number 2 in this category is that do certain practices define me as a Jew, like keeping Shabbos, for example, right? If I do something, then I'm Jewish, and if I don't do something, then I'm sort of less Jewish or not Jewish. And thirdly is this, since this question bothers a lot of non-Orthodox Jews, it's obvious that it reveals their deep desire to be good Jews. They want to be good Jews. So what is a good Jew? Is a good Jew defined by Orthodox Judaism, what a good Jew is? Or is it defined by certain rituals that they have to do? Let's define what is a good Jew. So Rabbi Orlovsky is the category of, is Orthodox Judaism the only way and somehow everyone else is less of a Jew? Is it a certain practice that can make me Jewish? And thirdly, I want to be a good Jew. What is a good Jew, if you could define that?
Okay. Well, I want to start by saying that this is an issue that is particularly sensitive to me, being, I think, the only Baal Tshuva here. I think all you people are FFPs, right? Yeah. So
I haven't.
What?
I haven't done Tshuva yet.
Okay. So we have a not FFP.
Just a from birth.
This is a particularly sensitive point for me. I have to give a little background. My father grew up in Brownsville. His father was an Orthodox Jew, but he knew nothing. He was a simple Jew from Poland who knew what he knew and kept what he knew, but my father had no Jewish education. And if you know from that generation, my father was born in 1925, you had to make it on your own. And it was during the Depression. My father had to drop out of school to help support his family. And he kept whatever he remembered, and we did whatever we did. We moved out to Long Island, and my father was one of the founders of the East Meadow Jewish Center, which was a conservative synagogue. Now, I knew my father grew up in an Orthodox synagogue, and I knew that he felt a connection to that. I was wondering why I was conservative, and I spoke to one of the other founders, and I said, look, we came out to Long Island, the whole thing was nothing. It was all built from scratch. And it was all farmland that was turned into houses. And we had to start. So we called down representatives from the Reform, the Conservative, and the Orthodox. So the Orthodox said, we have nothing for you. And the Reform came down. It was too much for us. Most of us came from Orthodox homes, and it was too much for us. And conservative, it had the feel of an Orthodox synagogue. Our rabbi was Orthodox, the cantor was Orthodox, the sitter was Orthodox, but they had mixed seating and microphones, and it was comfortable. It was comfortable. And he said, and the United Synagogue came down and said, we'll give you a charter, we'll give you seed money, we'll give you names of rabbis, we'll give you everything prepackaged that you can start with. So it was just too good an offer to turn down. And so almost every synagogue that opened over them was conservative. The point is, though, that Reform and conservative have a philosophy. Now, that's what people forget. Most people were like my dad, right? I said to him once, Dad, what are we? Are we Reform, we're conservative, or Orthodox? My father worked Saturday. He would come home Friday night from work after Shabbos, and he would make kiddush and hamotzi, and we'd have brisket and chicken soup, And I said to him once, I said, Dad, what are we? Reform, conservative, Orthodox? So he says, well, we're conservative. We go to a conservative synagogue. So I said, Dad, conservative says you have to keep Shabbos also. He says, okay, then we're Reform. And I found that answer so telling because it's a lot of ways that people define their Judaism. If you keep 30% you're Reform, 60% you're conservative, 90% you're Orthodox, 100 you're Hasidic. You understand? That's why you can have terms like conservadox, 75%, reformative, 43%, and people define themselves not by what they believe, but by their level of practice. People used to ask me when I was younger, is your father religious? And I said, no, my father's not religious because my father worked on Saturday. How could he be religious? And as I got older and I became nuanced, I realized my father was what we would call a non-practicing Orthodox Jew. His philosophy was Orthodox, but he didn't do it. He didn't keep everything. Listen, full disclosure, I don't keep everything. There's a lot of things I don't keep. I don't justify it to myself. I know I should do it. I know I shouldn't speak Lashon Hara. I shouldn't speak bad about other people, but I do, and I'll tell you who, and I'll tell you why. And I'm going to name names. Just kidding. But the fact is, I'm not perfect. So the goal is not the level of observance. The goal is the belief system. So Reform, it's very easy. They don't believe that the Torah was given by God. They believe that Judaism is a set of traditions. And whenever I would speak to a Reform Jew, leader, anybody, I always ask them the same question. Why should I be a Reform Jew? And they say to me, because Orthodoxy is this and Orthodoxy is that. I said, okay, that tells me I shouldn't be an Orthodox Jew. Why should I be a Reform Jew? Because Orthodoxy, I said, okay, you convinced me. I'm out. Okay, I'm done. I give it up. You understand? Give me a ham sandwich. Now tell me why I should be a Reform Jew. It's a very hard question to answer. So you say, well, morality. I said, I can be a secular moralistic person. What do I have to be a Reform Jew for? What do I have to go to synagogue? What do I need any of this for? It's a very hard question to answer. And that's why. Conservative, because I grew up in conservative and I actually know what conservatives believe in. Most people don't. The whole thing is set on a contradiction. Because on the one hand, they say, we have Talmudic scholars too, and we follow the Talmud. The other thing is they have this concept that Solomon Schechter came up with called Catholic Israel, which means the Jewish people will ultimately decide what they accept. So when it came to ordaining women, so the Talmud department of JTS said, you can't do it halachically. And they put it to a vote of the congregations. The congregation said, we want to. But then you're not a halachic movement. You got to make a decision. Either you're a halachic movement or you're not a halachic movement. And if so, then you're basically Reform light. And that's what ends up happening is they get caught in between the two of them. So,
but why? So meaning, but Orthodox Jews, and at least conservative Jews or Reform Jews, feel like Orthodox Jews are viewing them as lesser Jews.
100% not
matter
true. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you. You're not defined by your level of observance. If you're a Jew, you're a Jew, right? Some Jews do more, some Jews do less. That doesn't take away from your Judaism. Now, let's be fair. Okay, Reform said, we don't believe in the Torah anymore, and we're going to convert you to our religion. Now, the Protestants at least had the decency to make themselves their own religion when they broke off from Catholicism. I respect that. And if the Reform would not call themselves Judaism, they would call themselves Hebraicism, I'd be okay with that. But you can't say, I deny the basis of your religion. I'm going to convert somebody to it and then demand that you accept them as a Jew. That's not fair. You can't just change the rules in the middle and then demand that we play by it. And I have no problem with it. I was speaking to a girl once in the Discovery, and she didn't have an Orthodox conversion, and somebody told her, halakhically, you're not a Jew, and she was very offended. And she asked me, she was very upset. She asked me, and I said, do you think you're Jewish? She said, yeah. I said, so who cares what anybody else thinks? She says, well, I want to be respected by all Jews. I said, okay. So then Orthodoxy has standards, the same standards Judaism had for 3,300 years. We didn't change anything. We're still going by the same definitions that we've always used. So if you want your grandchildren to marry my grandchildren, okay. So if you think it's worth your while, but if you decided that I had a Reform or conservative conversion and I'm happy with that and I think I'm a Jew, that's fine with me. But we have definitions. It's not based on observance. I haven't met a perfect Jew. I've met a perfect idiot, but I've never met a perfect Jew. Yeah? The person said to me once, I feel like a perfect idiot. I said, nobody's perfect, but you come close. So, okay. So you fall short. That's why I said with my father. My father became Shomer Shabbos at the end of his life. He always wanted to. He sacrificed to get his kids a Jewish education. He used to have a Passover Seder. He kept the kosher home. He worked on Shabbos. He was in the flower business. He thought he had to go in on Saturday. So what is he? What is he compared to somebody else who keeps everything but never thinks about it, grew up with it, is doing everything from rote, has made no choices and sacrifices. So that's why there's God. I'm not God. Yeah, I don't like the hours. I'm very happy where I am. And so me to sit down and start judging this Jew is better than that Jew or this Jew, there's only two types of Jews. There's only two types of Jews. And those are coming into Rosh Hashanah, right? We talk about the book of life and the book of death. What's the difference? Whether we're pointed towards God or away from God. That's it. If we're pointed towards God, then that's it. We're heading in the right direction. So you're over here and I'm over here and he's over there. Okay. It's not a race. I'm pointed towards God. If I'm running away from God, it's okay. So I'm running away from God. By the way, that doesn't make me not a Jew. Doesn't make me not a Jew. So those are my personal thoughts on the matter. There's more to say, but as far as I'm concerned, I have any Jew who considers himself a Jew today, after 2,000 years of exile, of pogroms, of inquisitions, of a Holocaust, and you want to be a part of us, more power to you. I don't think there can be anything better than that or greater than that. What you do and what you don't do, listen, there's always room for improvement. I have to tell you one last story, and then I'll stop talking, at least for a minute. But Mark Twain was having problems with his back, so he went to a doctor, and the doctor said, "You have to stop smoking, you have to stop drinking, you have to stop carousing." So he does, and his back feels better. So one day he's someplace and he meets this elderly woman, and she says, "I'm having back pains." So well, you have to stop smoking. She goes, "I don't smoke." You have to stop drinking. She goes, "I don't drink." He goes, "Well, you have to stop carousing." She goes, "I don't carouse." He goes, "Well, if you don't have any problems, how can I help you?" Those are some thoughts.
Got it. Okay. Rav Gav, let's go to you. And so specifically, again, Rabbi Orlovsky is basically, very, very amazing point at the end, saluting anybody that wants to be part of this nation that has gone through what we've gone through, without judging where you are on the totem pole. But Rav Gav, and I'm sure you've come across this, where people feel that they're judged by the Orthodox community as being a lesser Jew because of their movement, whether it be conservative, reform, etc. What's your take on people being lesser or more of a Jew in these categories?
I first just have to share with you that I am thoroughly surprised by the Holy Rabbi's response. He went soft over there, and I'm very, very impressed. The way that you responded at the end is beautiful. If you want to be part of it, that's great. And I agree with that, but I was expecting you to with the knockout at the end, and I'll explain what I mean by that. There are two things that are going on. There's something called being a Jew.
FFBs are impossible.
You can't, exactly. You say something nice, we come at you. You say something straight up, we come at you. Don't forget, we're just FBs. Anyway, so.
And we're just getting started.
Exactly. We're just from births. There's two factors here. One is something called Judaism, and there's something else called a Jew. A Jew is a Jew. If your mother is Jewish or you convert to Judaism, then you are Jewish. Then there's something called Judaism. And this is a question that, like Rabbi Orlovsky asked his father, so what are we? I like to ask this question when somebody says they're Jewish. I say, what does that mean? What does Judaism mean? Forget Orthodox, conservative, Reform. Define Judaism. And when they say religion, I say, oh, Christianity. They say, no. It's a religion. I'm like, oh, Buddhism. Well, they're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, so it's the same thing. They go, no. I'm like, so what's the difference? What is Judaism? And I, by the way, I challenge also Orthodox, conservative, Reform, and constructionist, and 43 and 75% in between, right? Everybody to answer the question, what is Judaism? And essentially, when did it become what's known as the Jewish people? We were known as Hebrews, right? We were traveling, and I don't mean the actual term Yehudi, because that's a different concept. But I mean, what do we call this? Essentially, when we stood at Mount Sinai and we received the Torah, God gave us a book, and this book is if you've ever watched any of my shiurim, you're going to see also different ways of defining this, but I'm going to use it just for all intents and purposes right now to say he gave us a guide of how to live our life, which is a mandatory yet optional. And what I mean by that is you have to do it, but you have the option not to. It's mandatory yet optional, which means just like a red light, you have to stop there, but you have the option not to. And the difference between a red light and God is that, God is at every street corner, right? So you're not getting away without some sort of consequence for better or worse in everything we do. So this is really what it comes down to. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. If you feel like, or Elazar is saying, you feel like you're Jewish, then what do you care? That's a discussion of that girl's self-esteem and why she feels she needs everyone else to care what she is. But the reality is, just because you feel like you're Jewish doesn't mean that you're Jewish. If your mother is Jewish or you convert to Judaism, you're Jewish. Then there's something called a practicing Jew, one who practices Judaism. I have Judaism, I have a Jew, and I put them together. And like the Holy Rabbi said, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who's doing everything. I think there are a few out there, great people out there. I am not one of them, but the way I like to say it is, am I trying to do the right thing? And sometimes I fall to my desires, or am I not even attempting to do the right thing? And sometimes I accidentally do it. That's really, which direction are you headed in? And just to keep this a little more succinct and short, to hold on to my holy brother of Yitzchak Feldheim Shlita, I want to just end with a little story. Although, like always, like these are sound bites. Each one of us, I don't say probably, I know, have hours on this alone. But here's the deal. There's a rabbi named Rabbi Gifter.
I said everything I got to say.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I believe that. Like I bought the bridge off you last week. But anyway, so Rabbi Gifter, I want my money back. Anyway, so Rabbi, there was a big rabbi named Rabbi Mordechai Gifter. When I mean by big, I mean in stature. He was a great sage. He actually wasn't that big, but Rabbi Gifter, who was what most would call an Orthodox or perhaps even ultra-Orthodox Jew, wearing the whole monkey suit, the black, the white, the beard, the whole thing, the 9 yards, the hat, and the whole thing. And he once came to speak to, again, he's an Orthodox rabbi coming to speak to Orthodox Jews. And he comes into the shul, to the synagogue. And when he comes in, he gets up and it's quiet because you give honor to the rabbi, totally quiet. And he starts by saying, I just want everyone here to know, I'm not Orthodox. If you are Orthodox, you'd understand the shockwaves that went through the shul. Everyone was like what? He goes, relax, I'm not conservative. I'm not Reform. I'm not A, B, C. I'm not conservadox. I'm not any of these things. He said, I am a Jew who is trying to keep God's book. The term Orthodox is a term which came into being because you had to define groups. It's relatively new. There was no such thing as Orthodox Judaism. It was Judaism. And for the most part, it was practicing Judaism. And unfortunately, over the years, people fell off for whatever reason. The rabbi mentioned many of them, pogroms and holocausts and who knows what's, and all the terrible things that happened, and traveling and inquisitions and exiles, etc. But at the end of the day, there's something called a Jew who practices Judaism. It's not Orthodox, Reform, conservative. So the question at the end of the day is, do we know what the book is? Do we know what the book says? And are we attempting to do that? If at the end of the day we're not succeeding in everything, okay, we're trying. But at the end of the day, we have to at least put in our time. And that, my friends, is how I would define this concept. It's not a better or worse, about just defining our terms.
Okay, Rabbi Feldheim, I'm glad Gav saved some time for you here. But Rabbi Feldheim, I'm sure you have people from different sects and movements of Judaism who want to be good Jews, right? What defines a good Jew? Is it only people who the category of Orthodox Judaism, and it's the letter of the law guys who are doing some type of practice or ritualistic thing? What is a good Jew? How would you describe, the guy coming to seek being a good Jew?
So I think the first thing to give clarity, I mean, I agree with everything they both rabbis did a pretty solid job over here, but I just want to give a terminology. A good way to think of it is this distinction between good and evil and right and wrong. And a lot of the questions get resolved when you iron out the difference between those two approaches. What does it mean to be right and wrong, and what does it mean to be good and bad? So in this week's parasha, we have shoftim v'shotrim, judges and policemen. There are two different jobs. One job is the judge. What is correct? What is the proper way to live? That's an intellectual process of, is there something called correct? Once we determine what is correct, then it's an emotional struggle to live up to my personal value system. While we all can differ in what our beliefs are, as opposed to what is right, in regards to what is right and wrong, what's correct and incorrect, in the intellectual struggle, the shofet, the judge, the judgment part of life, the struggle of goodness is really the same for everyone. Goodness is the emotional struggle for me to adhere to what I already believe. So you can technically be a very good person and at the same time be wrong. Imagine, it's a crazy metaphor, but imagine this kid growing up in a nation of cannibals, and the mother says, like, Mikey, I made your favorite supper, and Mikey says, I'm not eating it, whatever, and mother goes, I worked so hard. He goes, I don't care, so it happens to be a French explorer. So Mikey is 100% right in not eating the French explorer because you're not supposed to eat people. But at the same time,
you're not supposed to eat French people. They give you indigestion.
Oh, I'm sorry?
French people give you indigestion.
We call them freedom explorers now. Whatever, it changed. Anyways, so, but at the same time, the kid is chutzpahdik to his mother, and he's disregarding everything how hard she works for him. And a person can be right and be bad, and can be wrong and be good. And it's important to separate, to make those distinctions. I'd like to say, like Rabbi Orlovsky started off, I used to do a lot of debates with Reform and conservative rabbis. And I would make the exact same point as that. I would start off and I would say, I don't know why we're having a debate. I don't know who decides these things. People like to see people fighting each other. The truth of the matter is that we're all exactly the same. We all believe the same stuff. If you get into the ideologies, the right and the wrong of it, the Orthodox believe that God gave the Torah. And therefore we believe we have to keep the whole thing. We have a hard time when people want to do things that are forbidden. We have to be strong. The Reform have the opposite problem. They believe that God didn't give the Torah. So you don't have to keep any of it. The problem is they have to justify why they have any laws, why you can't intermarry, why you have Yom Kippur. The conservative found this place in the middle where God sort of gave the Torah. So you should keep it when you can, but when it gets difficult, you don't really have to. It's a little hazy. But what I said what I always start in my debate with is, bottom line is 99% of you are shocked to hear that your movements don't believe in the Torah. You don't know that. You thought they have some kind of explanation how the Torah is true, but we don't have to keep it today for some other reason. No, the reason why they don't require it is because they don't believe it was given. So none of you are really Reform or conservative. You're all non-perfectly practicing Orthodox. We are all struggling. The good and the bad is difficult. In anything in life, everyone agrees that you have to be loving and respectful to your parents, but it's a struggle. No one has a right to be insulted if you say you're not a good son, if you don't call your mother, you don't visit. If once a year, Mother's Day, you send her a card, that's not called a good son. All of a sudden, when it comes to religion, people have a problem with these terminologies. Listen, if there's something real, there's something called being a child and a parent, then there's something called being a good child. If you don't believe if you believe it is something called Judaism, then there's a barometer of what's called Jewish. Okay, so that's my first thing. So good and evil. I'm going to show you. Let me give you two tools. This is to sort of, again, we're not just answering the questions. We're asking sort of how to communicate these ideas. So let me give you two quick anecdotes that will explain my approach to this. The first thing is to be able to show someone this distinction between good and bad and right and wrong. That the Torah has real rules. There's a fun story. I had this great guy in my neighborhood when I was a rabbi, a little bit irreverent, but fun. I love those kind of guys. Like he would drive by on Shabbos, he'd see me on my porch, he'd pull in with his cigarette and go, "Rabbi, how you doing? Can I have some cholent?" I loved it. We had a lot of fun. It's a challenge, he wasn't a wallflower. He calls me one day, and I figured I could play with a guy like this. So the guy calls me up one day, goes, "Rabbi, I get a mazel tov. My wife had a boy." I said, "Mazel tov." He goes, "Can you give me a number of a real moel?" I said, "I most certainly can't give you the number of a moel." He goes, What do you mean?" He goes, "If I hear that you gave your kid a bris, I'm calling the police." He goes, "What are you talking about? What's the matter with you?" I said, "Don't you dare give your kid a bris." He goes, "Oh, because I'm Reform, I'm not a Jew?" "Oh, you're as Jewish as I am." So he goes, "So why are you not giving me the moel's number?" I said, "Because it's child abuse. It's sexual child abuse. You know what happens to people like you in jail? What right do you have to cut your kid, make him bleed and film it and throw a party?" He goes, "Well, you don't give your kid a bris?" I said, "Every one of the boys, every one of them." He goes, "So what? I said, "It's very simple. I believe that God gave us a Torah that commands us to give kids a bris. You don't believe that God gave the Torah. You think it's all hogwash. So what right do you have to cut your kid in public and film it because it's fun?" He goes, "Well, my grandfather did it, and my father did it, and my grandfather." I said, "Someone's got to stop the cycle of abuse. What's the matter with you? It's going to go on forever?" You don't have a right to cut your kid because it makes you feel good, because your family did it. People have to reassess their ideas. This isn't a feeling. I do it because I believe that God said so. I believe it's right. And therefore, when I do it, I'm moral. It's the same thing as Jewish mothers, secular Jewish mothers who don't want their kid to intermarry. You're a racist. You should be proud of your kid that he grew up in a racist home and he's going to marry the best girl he could find and overcome his parents' biases and prejudices. We don't intermarry because that God said so. But if you don't believe that God said so, on what grounds are you separated between races? So people need to understand it's not a difficult thing to get clear to them. And once you iron this out, it's very enlightening. And I could say, so now that you have an ideology, now we can talk about how good you are.
Okay. Right, Feldman, I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna give you a chance afterwards to get to your second point. But just to really assess what you're saying is that if you believe in the book, and Rav Gav, you alluded to this also. If you believe in the book, and you believe that God gave this Torah, so then all of a sudden you could start to judge levels of observance based on the book and that belief. But if you don't believe in it to begin with, and we're on two different playing fields, it's no longer a level of where you're holding on the totem pole. Is that correct?
But you can, I want to show now, but you can be a good person. You don't believe in the book, so you have a different standard.
No, you can be a good person. So when people say...
If the book is real, you may be wrong. I want to show that now. But let me say, by the way, this guy, I gave him the number of the Moel, but because at the end he says to me, he has to say the magic words. Maybe I do believe you're supposed to give. I said, good. Make sure your kid knows that you said that. When he has a bris, he should know because his father believes in something. It'll change his life.
Got it.
That's like Rabbi Orlovsky was saying about his father.
Right.
He believed in orthodoxy. He just wasn't necessarily, doing everything, but he still believed it.
Right. So Rabbi Orlovsky, there are people specifically non-Orthodox people who have a big complaint because they say, look, at the end of the day, even Orthodox Jews, you guys have to deal with like modern issues. There's things called Shabbos clocks, there's Eruvs, there's stuff, there's contemporary issues, and you took the Torah and what the rabbis back then had said, and you were able to modernize it to be contemporary. So why is that different than our rabbis, making Judaism more contemporary within our communities?
Yeah, Erev was one of those newfangled notions that was introduced by King Solomon. I mean, let's just keep a perspective over there. But I always find Erev as a wonderful example because I urge you to go to find a clip of this video from the Daily Show where they send this correspondent out into the Hamptons because there are people who are opposing them building an Erev. And you look at this thing and goes, you can see how terrible it is, can't you? No?
Yeah, that little string.
This tiny little string, And the idea is, now my mother said the same thing to me. That's why I find it interesting. She wanted me to open the refrigerator on Shabbos, and I said, I can't because the light goes on. So she says, what if we put one of those strings up around the house? Then could you do it?
Now, Rabbi, the famous one is where this guy comes by and he sees a guy putting up, the guy sees a guy carrying on Shabbos. He says, why are you carrying on Shabbos? He says, well, you see those things, on the side, we consider that to be, doorposts. He says, and what's the thing on top? Well, we consider it to be, an idea of letting you know that you're crossing territories. And he says, why don't you just consider today Sunday and it'll be much easier, right?
So it's a good example, right? So in this video, the guy has an Erev hat. He has a hat with like a bunch of poles and strings around, and he goes, Rabbi, now if you wear this, can you eat the ham sandwich?
Right.
So people say, look, God said you can't carry, and the rabbis, with a wink and a nod, they said, yeah, put up some poles and a string, and then you can carry. No, they said you can't carry in a Rosh Hashanah, which is a public thoroughfare. You can put up strings and sticks from today till tomorrow. You still can't carry there because God said you can't carry there. Except what? There's a place that's not a public thoroughfare. It's not considered a Rosh Hashanah, right? And you could carry there. But the rabbi said don't carry there because if you carry there, you might end up taking it and carrying it into the Rosh Hashanah, the public thoroughfare. But if you set up these strings and the sticks, then we know you'll remember not to carry out. So the rabbis are the ones who forbade you to carry there unless you put up the strings. But you can't just magically make something in the Torah go away. Poof. Yeah. So Shabbos clocks, it goes back to the Mishnah. The question is, could I put on my water mill that it's going to grind going into Shabbos? So the answer is, I said it before Shabbos. It's my possessions. It's not me. It's not my animals. It's not my children. It's not my workers. It's just my property is doing stuff. I can continue to do it because I'm not doing anything. It was done beforehand, and it's doing it. But, so to speak, my possessions are working, but not me. That's what a Shabbos clock is based on. But you'll never find, people, and the great term they use for this is called the evolution of halacha. Yes, there is an evolution of halacha. As time goes on, it gets stricter and stricter, mostly because we become dumber and dumber, right? So, for example, how do you make a matzah? There's a recipe in the Mishnah. Take flour and water, make it into a ball, slap it on the side of the oven, and then peel it off. Today, we call that a lafa, yeah? And you make a shwama, those big flat bread. That's what it was like. And then we said we didn't know how to make sure it was cooked through. So we make it really thin. We put holes in it. We burn it so that the box is tastier than the matzah. And then we charge you $80 a pound. But that's the evolution of halacha. But you'll never find a case where the Torah says, "Oh, you can't. You could suddenly allow something that the Torah forbade." The other great example they always bring is Yibum. It says that if your brother dies and he doesn't have any children, you marry his wife, and then today we say that's not socially acceptable, so do chalitza instead. A whole ceremony with the shoe and whatever, right? But the Torah gives you both options. All the rabbis are saying is don't take option A, take option B. But they didn't say option A doesn't work, and they didn't say option B does work, or we invented option B. Both examples were there. So that's why whenever you find a loophole and you take a look at the loophole, 9 out of 10 times it's going on a rabbinic law that the rabbi said you can't do this unless we built into it a certain safeguard.
Whereas why many Reform and conservative etc. are asking, our rabbis are also making reforms and evolutions to what was halacha.
Right. As long as once you move into the realm of the Torah says you can't do this, and we say you can, that's where you shift. That's the guideline, So you suddenly come up and say, well, the Torah says you're not allowed to do this, but the Torah says you can't make a fire. That's a verse in the Torah. But that's because back then they needed a flint, they needed a this, they had to get that, they had to do this, a whole big thing. Now we just, we turn on the oven. No, you just made that up out of thin air. It says don't make a fire. No, you came up with this whole thing, It says, why does it say eat kosher? Well, pork isn't good for you. Trichinosis, this problem, refrigeration. No, it says don't eat pork. It's really pretty straightforward.
Rabbi Feldman, how do you break down for people the concept of how Rabbi Lafke is saying that we as long as you don't cross the line of making something the Torah said don't do into a do, that you can evolve, Jewish law into practices today, and how that differs from what how conservative and Reform rabbis might be taking the letter of the law.
I'll tell you, I think the way we're talking about it misses the whole point. You're going to sit here and defend every single rabbinic law and show you how it works. The issue is a much more simple issue. Is people are under the impression that rabbis bless things and they go poof, and this is how it is. And it's just because you're some artificial spiritual level, you have power to change things. People just need to understand what a rabbi is. When I was a kid and I went to Israel, I went to the Mir. So we grew up. Rav Shach was the leader of the generation, Rav Elazar Menachem Monshach, and he was getting older. And I wanted to hear Rav Shach. He'd go on, and all my rebbeim would always tell me stories of they saw the Chavetz Chaim, they saw, and sort of like, your growth is capped by the greatest person you ever saw. Your conceptions. Conceptions is what caps your achievement. You can't become better than you imagined. So the greatest thing you can do is expose yourself to greatness. So I determined it was worthwhile leaving yeshiva one day, traveling to Bnei Brak just to hear a shir from Rav Shach. And it was hard to get in my stuff. Rav Shach was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Panovich Yeshiva, which was the Harvard of Israel, the elite yeshiva. He had 2,000 of the sharpest, smartest kids in the Jewish people, literally on their game, young, on fire. Rav Shach at the time was 92 years old. And he was giving a shir. And this is what I watched. You walked into this room, Rav Shach was on a stage, 92 years old, standing by the pulpit, and he would give the shir. The shir had 4 parts. First, he would give a list of questions. Then he would give a principle that he would use to answer the questions. Then he would show how the principle answered all the questions, and then he would bring proofs to his principle. That was the order of every shir, except that at the end of each stage, he didn't transition to each stage. He finished saying the questions, and the room would erupt in shouting. 2,000 of his sharpest minds screaming about the validity of his questions. And I was watching them, everyone in their little groups, in a loud room. And one by one, the questions would resolve themselves, and a few questions remained. The guys whose questions survived the internal debate, they made their way to the front of the room under Rav Shach's pulpit, and they screamed up to Rav Shach their questions, and he screamed down at them, and they fought it out. If Rav Shach succeeded in keeping his questions and his questions survived, he was able to continue. Then Rav Shach would say his principle. The room would erupt in screaming. Again, they would come up to the front. He would have to fight down these 20, 21, 22-year-old young, sharp guys. Rav Shach, I'm sure he needed to take a nap in the afternoon, but he fought them. If his principle survived, he went further. Then he showed how his principle answered the questions. The whole way, fighting these guys. And you know what happens? If one of these guys would succeed at stumping Rav Shach, he would have to close his book and walk away. That could happen once, and this guy would be the hero of the yeshiva. He's the fastest gun in the West. He's the man. He's the king. If it happened once, it would be great. If it happened twice, everybody would, by the same guy, everyone would be quiet. And eventually Rav Shach would have to retire. We treat him with all the respect. But the guy on top of the room is there because he's the best. There's no magic. There's no inheriting of position. You're there because you're the sharpest and the smartest. There's no place in the world where there is greater scrutiny and debate and intellectual honesty than in the Beis Medrash. Somebody writes a halachic ruling, it needs to be published. We have shelves, look behind Rabbi Orlovsky. Half of those books are called Shilos and Chuvos, Responsa, because nobody can write a halachic position without writing it down that every young whippersnapper has a chance to rip it apart, because you'll make a name for yourself and you'll be the star. There's a big incentive to taking down. You do it with respect sometimes, or you apologize afterwards for not having respect. But more often the second, you just get the fervor, and the rabbis love when you're chutzpahdik with truth. That my greatest compliments were like, good line, Feldheim, but with a little smack, But people need to see this. Anyone who would go to a shir from Shach, 92 years old, would never ask a question. Let me just show you the flip side in 1 second. I did a debate against the conservative rabbi once. I did a lot of them, but the shortest debate I ever had. The conservative rabbi got up and he goes, Rabbi Feldheim is going to try and portray himself as living with a fealty to halacha. I wasn't sure what that word fealty meant at the time, but I looked it up afterwards. I guess right. Rabbi Feldheim is the only one living with that he lives. The Orthodox live keeping halacha, and they have sources. And he wants to claim that he's assuming that we don't believe in halacha. We don't use sources. We also have halacha. And so I'm going to challenge Rabbi Feldheim on his own terms. Rabbi Feldheim, what do you say about the Maharshal? And he's about to say something. Say, wait, Rabbi, before you say it, before you get personal, we get into a fight, I just want to clarify one thing. I'll let you go further. You didn't say anything objectionable yet, so let's get this out of the way. You're about to quote me a Maharshal, and which ostensibly, from the way you described it, is going to say something, it's going to be a halachic source undermining some position that we have in Orthodoxy. And you're trying to say that you also believe in halacha. So I like that, and it would be beautiful if that was true, and I'll gladly answer the Maharshal that you're going to quote. I just want to make sure that you really are living with a fealty to halacha, and you're not just pulling out a Maharshal out of nowhere that's convenient to you. So here's how I'm going to establish it. I would like to know any one of the next 10 questions. Is Maharshal a name or just an acronym for a name? If it's an acronym, do you know what it stands for? Do you know where he lived? Do you know any other book he wrote besides the one you're quoting? Do you know even the book that you're quoting, what it's called? Can you tell me any other thought of the Maharshal from any of his books, anywhere else in the Talmud besides the one you're saying? Because if you really live with halacha and you care about the Maharshal, I'm sure you know who he was, when he lived, what he wrote. I'm sure you know something. Because I can name you something the Maharshal said in every tract of the Talmud. I live with the Maharshal. You're trying to say you're the same. So I'll gladly go on with this debate if you can answer any one of those 10 questions. But if not, then this is a lie. And it's exactly like you. I didn't even say it, like you said. We live with halacha, and you live masking compromises. You can make compromises. There are needs sometimes compromises, but don't claim to have a fealty to halacha if it's not. Answer any of the 10 questions. How long did the debate last? It didn't go past that. Of course, there's no answer. We know the truth. Look at Rabbi Orlovsky's books. Most Reform rabbis I met can't even read them. They can read Hebrew, but not without the vowels, not the, and it's not an insult. They weren't trained in that. They went to a different school. They don't believe in the Torah. So we can debate whether it's true or not, but don't expect from them something that is not on their. It's not an option.
Okay.
Just admit it. Just admit. That's all I want. Just admit that you're not keeping Torah. You don't believe in the Torah, and most of the congregants will be shocked.
Got it. So a lot of what we're saying here combined with Rabbi, I'm going to start the next question with you. But a lot of what we're saying really here is on the basis of that. That means if you really believe in the Torah and you believe in its laws, that's the starting point for being able to evolve halacha, etc. But if the starting point is I don't really believe it, and I could pick things out that show that that's why I live my life the way, then that's not the whole picture. That's not a starting point there. Rav Gav, I want to go to you on this because there are a lot of people who believe that Orthodox Jews are living robotic lives and are in this thing for blind faith. This is sort of what we dive into, not seeing what's around us. Two questions to that. Orthodox people seem to lead a very severe, narrow type of life. Isn't it all based on blind faith? And if it is based on blind faith, is that what Judaism is all about, Orthodox Judaism? And secondly, doesn't science and the modern fields of psychology and philosophy make religion obsolete? That means, come on, at this point in time, we're not in the Stone Age. We can figure this out on our own. Isn't Orthodox Judaism and even Torah a crutch that you can let go of at this point?
Yeah, I see those as two very separate questions, but could be that the other esteemed rabbis see them as the one and the same. We'll just do it al rishon v'al achron achron. The first question was, is it true that there are, I don't remember you said the word Orthodox or not, but Orthodox Jews that are living their lives robotically, like living
No, it's not only that. It seems that Orthodox Judaism is blind faith and it's sort of robotic. This is what, this is what you got to do. This is what you do. It's a very narrow type of life.
Yeah. Okay. So it's funny because I hate to be the guy I really don't hate to be, but that's just my self-esteem and my projection to be the guy to repeat the same idea about how, is it true? Is it not true? That's really the question. But in terms of my relationship with it, it might be that that's the case. There are many people out there that live their life of blind faith. This is a true statement. Whether they are religious, whether they are secular, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Christian, many people live their life. And this is actually a mission of my own personal life. And one of the things which I very much enjoy speaking to both sides of the spectrum about. And I'll, somebody said to me once, like, okay, you're going to talk to a secular crowd. What are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to talk about the same thing that I would talk about to a religious crowd. I'm just going to say Moses instead of Moshe. Right? I'm just going to translate, but it's all truth. So let's get down to what is the truth. I'm not going to butter it up for somebody who's not observant, and I'm not going to, do something more real for somebody who is, right? Is a very big pet peeve of mine to get into conversations about having an understanding, have a basic understanding of Yiddishkeit, to know the truth of Judaism, to know what it is, to understand what's going on. To what degree, that's debatable. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritties of this, but to be able, it's not just, I believe. Somebody who says, I believe, has, I think, walked into a different religion. Judaism is actually, you have to know. And it's a verse which we say every single day. Verse we say every single day in the prayer called Aleinu, where we say, V'yodata hayom, not V'yodata for the yeshivish out there. V'yodata. Just whatever, grammar. V'yodata, it actually means something different than you're not Yotzi Vaiter. It's like v'yahafta. V'yahafta, what's v'yahafta? Vaiter. V'yahafta. Anyway, enough about that. V'yodata hayom. V'ashevosa. What? El livavecha, which means you must know today and place it into your heart. We've got two things going on. We have to know and we place it into our heart. Now, the reality is, when it comes to kids, how they're going to know? How are they supposed to know? They don't have the intellectual capacity to understand what's going on, which is why here is the basic rule. I before E, except after C. Intellect before emotions, unless you're a child. When you are a child, it is emotions before intellect, because it's just the nature of the beast. There is no intellect. So what we do when our kids are young is we brainwash them like crazy. Teach them like crazy. I said the word. Oh no, he said brainwash. Chill. What's the definition of brainwashing? It depends if you like it or not. If you don't like something called brainwashing, if you like it, it's called education, right? So at the end of the day, what we do is we teach our children what we know to be truth. And then as they grow, we start to give them the understanding from the intellectual capacity. And there's different stages. That's why we have something called 6 years old is around the age of chinuch. 13 years old, the age of education, at 6 years old. You start educating your child, you start to push them a little bit more. Not a kid who's 1 year old. You know what you say? A kid's born. And when they're born, you go, no, you're nursing. Make a blessing. Shahakol. Why aren't you making a blessing? And he says, he's 1. What do you want from the kid? Right? Or not even 1. Okay, 2, 3, 3 years old, we start to whatever. By 6, according to most, we say education. Start to push a little more, we should start doing 13, bar mitzvah. Now we have more. 20, bar unshin, another level. And it starts to grow. It starts to grow. And we have more and more. But it's a shift of understanding. It's a very important point that it's not just a matter of what we do. We have to know, and then we place it into our heart. Now, it's very, very crucial because it could sound like a contradiction there. Because 1 second, but you're teaching them everything. So this, I'm going to refer to an example we gave when we first spoke about this, a similar point in session 2 or session 1. I like to ask secular crowds or even religious crowds to say, at what age do you plan on giving your kid his first straw and line of cocaine? And sometimes people answer that question, but most people say never. And I say, why? You right-wing, close-minded, brainwashing person. The answer is no, because you understand what's right and what's wrong. So you shut your kid away from running in the street and doing cocaine. And then as they get older, you try to give them an understanding of why that is. So the answer is, it's not robotic. Are there people that live that way? Certainly. Is that the way it's meant to be? Absolutely not.
Okay, good. So that means we're separating the Torah and Judaism versus some Jews that might. Rabbi Orlovsky, there are people out there that feel that, the book, I get it, the instruction book, once upon a time, that's all we had. People didn't have the technology we have today. They didn't have the research we had. They didn't have the science, the philosophy. Come on, do we really need this book? That is it, or is Judaism or even the Torah a crutch? At this point, we can sort of figure out all the concepts out on our own.
So first of all, you picked the 2 worst areas to ask, psychology and philosophy. Philosophy has been around for thousands of years. It didn't start today. It hasn't really gotten much better. If you read modern philosophy as opposed to
philosophy and video games. I'm saying it's a different level.
So, but psychology is always changing. The understanding of and the more the psychology grows, the closer it comes to the Jewish understanding of the human mind. It's absolutely amazing. I won't bring you a bunch of examples now, but the fact of the matter is, and this goes back to the point that the other rabbis have been saying throughout. If you don't believe in this thing, then you're right. I don't know why anybody's doing it if you don't believe in it. You like your filter fish, eat your filter fish, but why would a person keep it? If God gave this book, then this book is telling you eternal truth. People don't change. Technology changes, people don't change. What people want, happiness, fulfillment, spirituality, family, love, all of these things, they don't change in thousands of years. They stay very stable. So God says, listen, here's how you achieve it. This is what works. So they used to, they didn't have matches, so they didn't have natural gas lines in their house, so they didn't have running. So what? That doesn't change anything about people. That only changes technology. But people are people. So you're right. So it's a lot easier now to do the laundry than it was back then when you had to carry the water from the river and boil it up and put the clothes in and rub it on the, what do you call it, the washboard, Yeah, much easier now to throw it in a washing machine. That change people? That change anything about the essence of who we are, about spirituality, about search for meaning? I was on a plane sitting next to a middle-aged Israeli businessman who was on his way to India to join his wife. They were in an ashram studying Buddhism and spirituality. I said, did you ever consider Judaism? He says, what does Judaism have to do with spirituality? Judaism is about mitzvahs, things that you do. So okay, so he doesn't understand what Judaism is. Not his fault. He never got an education. But the spiritual pleasure and the thrill and everything that goes with that, that's an unbelievable thing. Technology is taking us that much further. They did a study that took 1,000 college kids off of their technology. I'm not talking about Jewish ones, across the world. They suffered the same withdrawal symptoms of people coming off of crack and cocaine. So suddenly Shabbos has no meaning of being able to move away from the technology instead of letting it control our lives? I don't hear it.
Got it.